Right, let's get about something which is facing us as important as the pandemic on the health front, but on the health front of the technology, you could say is chip shortage. A shortage which has been anticipated not too long ago, but it has started to surface in a way which is worrisome to a lot of people. Why are we saying that? Well, firstly, because we've talked about the fourth industrial revolution, and just to remind all of us what it is, it's the AI and big data type of revolution that is taking place, and we are all going to be very much affected in our lives. Of course, the first three revolutions, just to refresh our mind, is the steam, and then the electricity, and the computers, the third one, and now AI and big data. And what that requires is something very fundamental in terms of hardware. And the hardware we're talking about today is the integrated chip. Now, another name for it in the early days is what we called a transistor. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as to what a transistor is and how it sort of transformed itself into an integrated circuit and all the microprocessors and all that that are so fundamental to technology now. And of course, with this sort of very high, if you like, dependence on integrated circuits for the world, especially for the more advanced world who produce all the goods in many ways, including China, there is going to be a shortage because there has been a bit of a surge in demand. And we'll talk about it a little more as we go along. And of course, in broad terms, the surge has been to some extent because of the pandemic. And we know because of the pandemic, we have started to become more tech savvy. We're using computers, we are using the Zoom for today, for instance, which we wouldn't have. So society has advanced, especially in the West, quite dramatically since the sort of pandemic. So there is a shortage now. A shortage because there was on one side, the production sort of side of it. I'll talk about more, and then of course we also need to talk about what it is that we can do about it, and what is the way forward in terms of the ramifications as well, political and strategic and technological. Okay, with that, let's go and see what it is that we are going to be talking about in terms of today's agenda. Here we are. So I'm going to say a little bit more about what are integrated circuits, IC chips. And then we are going to be looking at and see why are they important, and we are going to look and see what has brought about the shortage and who are the big players in this game. And then, of course, tech nationalism. We talked about vaccine nationalism, we talked about water nationalism, and we talked about political nationalism. So here is another type of nationalism that is surfacing. And we'll see what can be done about that and see what the way forward is. So here we are. Let's look at the first transistor that was uh, developed by Bell Labs. Now, Bell Labs is one of those foremost type of research institutes in USA that had these very remarkable sort of talent there. And three of these scientists, they developed the transistor. Now, what is a transistor? Let's look at that and see. Well, the transistor is, well, before we go that, let's look at, for that big sort of advance that they did in science and technology, they won the Nobel Prize for Physics. And they created also the first tech company, and they based it in Silicon Valley. And we can see the Silicon Valley, the rise of that from that time onwards, because of the digital world that came about. So we have, this is a transistor. Now it may not look much, it's just a schematic. It's got those three poles here. One is called the collector, the emitter, and the base. Now the whole principle is that in order for the current to flow from one to the other this way, uh, you need to control it. And they do it by putting a small little current there, which will enable it to sort of go open the current like a gate, if you like a tap. So you just turn on the faucet and the water flows. So that's basically the transistor. And what it does is it's like a switch. You can either have it off with the current, and if you let it go, it put a little bit of current, small little current, and then the big current flows through. Now, this is a humongous type of technology because what they used inside this thing here is silicon and germanium. I seem to remember from my college days that those two sort of elements had a very good property in terms of allowing the current to flow and to be able to be controlled in a way which did this job. And that enabled the move away from the valve. You remember the valves? We had the old radios, we had bulb like looking things. They were the valves, they were the old transistors. And they were the ones that controlled, the flow of electricity. And, the main thing is if you, control the flow of electricity, you can either switch it off or switch it on. And that's the basis of a computer's, a switch, a 0 or a 1. And you can see from that basis what a fantastic sort of thing has been created to give us the technology of today. Okay, so let's see what it is that a transistor. Here it is. It's progressed from being a sort of a visible thing to something becoming less visible into what they call micro circuits and then integrated circuits. You can hardly see them. So very, very sort of small, tiny, and very efficient. Now, the way that you create these things is through very, very sort of complex machine, because you have to sort of have the purity of the elements, and you need to be able to connect these things into a circuit, which means all sorts of components are there, and they are built into the chip. And it's a very, very complex process. So a lot of countries can't make it. So those countries who can't make it, they're called fabless. They can't fabricate. And those who make it are called foundries. So these people don't design the chip, but they make the chip. And there are these companies that are well known. Intel, of course, we know. And there's this TSMC, which is the biggest Taiwan. Taiwan is the largest producer of integrated circuits, the chips, if you like. And they have about 50 or 60% of the global market, which is humongously big in terms of, share of the global, production. Intel, however, does both the little production and design, but a lot of companies just design on paper the circuitry. And that circuitry is then put into a foundry, say like in Taiwan, and they build it. And it's a very, very sort of highly skilled and knowledgeable sort of things there. Here are the integrated circuits. It's not just a switch, it's a conglomeration of thousands and thousands of switches connected to each other to perform certain functions. Here's this Intel here and this Taiwan company. And Samsung is another one of those companies that have about 10, 12, 15% of the global market. They also design and make. Taiwan just makes the chips. Intel designs and makes as well. Okay, what are these circuits used for? We also know, of course, smartphones, computers, cars, medical equipment, radios, thermostats. Think of it, they have a circuit inside. And circuit, if you like, is the intelligence that gives the intelligence to that little component, or if you like, gadget. So very, very sort of smart little integrated chips. So the way of looking at it is also like this, as somebody said, if software is eating the world, then the chips are the teeth. They make you digest what you're eating in a sort of acceptable manner. So they power our laptops, our cell phones, our cars, washing machines. Semiconductors are important for the military and the power grid as well. And there aren't enough of them getting made in a massive global shortage. That's what we are facing at the moment, a big shortage. And furthermore, there's other sort of things that need to also be mentioned as to the 5G. Now, the 5G, when it comes in, it sort of has a great need for extra circuits to come its way, and circuits which are going to be able to do the fast processing that needs to be done, because 5G is all about speed, and speed is the essence of future networks. We're not talking about these types of speeds for the countries that don't have internet. Uh, that's where Starlink will come in, of Elon Musk. But 5G is something which is much more predominant in big cities where there is a huge need to transmit big amounts of data to an exchange of data wherever it needs to be used. And there's also, you see, what happens is that Internet of Things, that like fridges and whatever gadgets you have, they will start to communicate as well with their bases, swab maintenance or whatever it may be. So a lot of data traffic is going to be uh, going through backwards and forwards. And that's why we need high speed to be able to sort of deal with that. And also, an example is the car. If you got the self-autonomous cars coming our way, they are going to be wanting to react in real time very, very fast. So if they see an obstruction in the front, all of a sudden happening, then the car needs to respond very quickly. So the signal coming in that bounces off that obstacle, whatever it is, it needs to be processed very quickly. So real-time exchange of data is taking place, and you need to do it at very, very fast speeds. So AI is, as we said in my earlier talks, we talked about the fourth industrial revolution in more detail. Now it's going to be AI basically coming. We will do nothing short of reorganizing the world as we know it. So it is going to be changing the world. A lot of people say, "Well, I'm quite happy the way that things are at the moment," but unfortunately, the progress and change will not stop if one does not sort of become part of it. So a good thing will be to try and become part of it, because then you'll be really utilizing the most modern ideas and make and the ideas that are coming forth are going to make life easier for many people. They're not going to make it difficult. It's just the initial effort has got to be put to try and see how to work it. And once you know how to work it, then it gives you immense amount of freedoms. Take, for instance, even your iPhones that you have. Now I use it quite sort of much. Whenever I want to take a bus, I just go there, tap into it, and tells me when the next bus is coming. If it's coming in 10 minutes, I walk up to the next bus stop. So you can see these little things you can do. And apart from that, you have the whole world's information at your fingertips. So that's quite something that you can sort of use whenever you want it, uh, be it during the day, during the night, or whatever. There's no sort of closing time for those things. So it's going to reorganize our world. So just a little bit of thing about how recently what we saw, that the first intelligence, artificial intelligence, first beat the a human being at a chess match, and we talked about it, I think, sometime. And then, of course, later on, it sort of the Alpha Zero came along. Alpha Zero beat the Go grandmaster, and Go is 100 times more complex in terms of having to have the options that are there for play, because chess has a limited number of 64 pieces, whereas Go, you can have innumerable combinations, a lot more than chess. So even that, the grandmaster of that was beaten by a computer, and that was by a learning computer, not just a programmable computer, but programmed to learn. And that's how it was. And of course, to do all these things, you need ICs at the behind that to be able to carry out the instructions that you wanted to do. So here we are driving cars, they diagnose of diseases, so it can write news articles, artistic can draw pictures and fight the enemy on the battle. So it can do practically everything. Maybe not to the level of individual satisfaction, but in certain sectors, it has become extremely better than a human being. Like, for instance, scanning the X-rays, for instance. They can scan X-rays and pick out, the sort of problems with an X-ray, 100 times faster than a human being and more accurately as well. So here we can just say that in summary, the semiconductors power the modern world. We are accepting that. They also power the factories that make these sort of electronic devices. Now there aren't enough of them getting to be made. The demand has surged so much that they're not enough to be made. Here's how the global shortage got so bad, and what's going to be done to fix it. So we talk about that. The countries that are very, very sort of instrumental in all this are Japan, Taiwan, Korea, China, and of course the US. Well, we have new manufacturing in Europe, as you can see. I haven't put on the US in there because it also is taking only a small fraction of the they fabricate only a small percentage of the total chips. We'll see the figures later. Now, who are affected? Um, so a lot of people who are making consumer goods, they are affected. And what they're doing is they're stocking up the chips because they're seeing that the orders are so many at the factories, they're stocking it up. And because of this demand that has been created by COVID. Now, of course, we talked about the car production being affected and all these the car manufacturers, they've got a double whammy hitting them. One is, of course, the oil prices, the fossil fuels, they're becoming less acceptable from the climate point of view. And the other thing is they need the circuits that need to sort of be incorporated into the car. And if there is a shortage, they can't build the cars. So there is a big sort of hold up there as well. And of course, these other IT companies as well, they're short on receiving supplies. So here we go. Increased demand, semiconductors are in short supply because of the strong demand. This summarizing what I've just said. Now, one other thing that we need to also look at is the business model of our commerce world is changing. As you can see in the commerce world, we've got, a lot of these barcodes, and all you have to do is to scan and then it gets registered. But even if you go to China, where e-commerce is even more developed, there you can see, you can just walk in and have your, the diagram read on your phone, and then you can walk out. And by the time you come out, everything is registered on your computer, on your phone, and even the money is deducted from your bank account. So pretty advanced type of business models are in operation. So that's creating a bottleneck. And of course, because of this sort of problem, there's going to be an impact between the big powers that be, who want to sort of say, well, we want to sort of, get into the act in a big way. And US and China are at trade war. And of course, it's one of the crucial things that is coming up as to how to deal with China on the integrated circuit side. And I'll talk about more later. Okay, here's another thing. Elon Musk, our friend, he's saying that not only are we going to put chips in items like cars and phones and so on, but we're going to put it into our brains as well sooner or later. I'm not sure what that's going to happen, but I think he's got ideas that we will be ending up with that. And of course, China is stockpiling at the moment because China's capability of producing chips is low. They buy a lot of their stuff from Taiwan, in fact. So they are very worried at having to sort of deal. Although they make the phones by the billions, they have to buy the chips from Taiwan and elsewhere. So what are we going to regard this IC chips as the new oil in the digital age? It's as important. It keeps the wheel turning, if you like. In the old days, it's the oil that did it. In the new, it's the IC chips that does it. So they are indispensable. And the production, as I said earlier, is very complex. And then chips can make winners and losers. Here, this is where a little bit of nationalism comes in. Now, the people who are making it, they can sort of, put somebody at the back of the queue and some others in the front of the queue. And of course, that means that your access to markets or finished goods gets affected. So it can be very, very sort of worrisome. Now, here is a guy that I think we need to remember. He's called Moore. Now, he came up in the 70s, 80s, I think it was 80s, that he says every would double the power of the chip. When I say the power, it's not just the electric power, but the capacity to do calculations uh, will increase or double every 2 years and halve the cost, basically. And that has held up that law, which is called Moore's law. It says the number of transistors on a chip doubles every 2 years, while the cost of computers is halved. So that has held up since the 70s to now. For the last 40 years, it has held up, which is quite astonishing. Although I think they're reaching the limits of that. Now, there's another thing that I forgot to mention. There's the 5G. I think we talked about it. Powers. Yeah. Okay, here are the chip manufacturers. Now, we've mentioned already, this is the big Taiwanese company, TCMC. They're called the foundry manufacturers. They don't design chips. They get the design from wherever, from Europe, from USA or from China, and they make it for them. Now, Samsung does a bit of both. Now, here is this Moore's law in operation, and not quite Moore's law in operation, but what here is talking about is the cost of the machine to build the chip is increasing enormously, because as you shorten the circuit lengths between components in an integrated chip, it becomes that much more difficult to try and sort of put together a complex circuit in a small chip. So the cost of building those chips, even though you may have the design, it's enormous. This is how it's progressed. See, this red one is now at about, you need to have 5 billion to create a factory to make a chip. Okay, this is giving us how this US is starting to lag behind. Although they are high in sales of integrated circuits and their and the other products that they make using that, their production capacity in the country is only 12%. So you can see they're sort of falling behind quite a lot there. Okay, this is just saying that the cause of shortage that has really accelerated the shortage is the COVID. Because what we have to do now is to work from home or go at school also learning, and that sort of home sort of becomes a base or a center for our activities more so than before. And we don't know, even when we come out of the pandemic, whether we are going to go back to the old ways. And there is a feeling that we may not be able to go back. There is going to be, because our habits have changed, and our awareness has changed, and I think we are going to modify our lives a bit. Okay, this is the same thing. Okay, this is just giving an indication between 2019 and 2020, how the increase has taken place. Quite a bit increased there in sale of chips of just USA. That's an 8% increase there. Um, so here we have global semiconductor sales growth. That's the same thing that I've mentioned. Okay, what's being done about it? Now, when Biden came in, he's highlighting, see this little chip he's pointing here? He says this is very crucial for rebuilding America, because America has fallen behind. And of course, we'll find out later by one of the people who are right in the top of the field in USA, Eric Schmidt, who's the head of Google for many years and is put in charge of producing a report to try and counteract the shortage that is there, and to try and advance the path for USA, how it can catch up again, because China is going too fast and too far away, too ahead. So this is the this is just a global number. A trillion chips are being used. That means about 128 per individual in the world. It just basically says, the chips are everywhere, and and those who don't have access to it are stagnating. So access to chips is very important. And this also, of course, is going to be affecting our globalization. And globalization has to do with supply chains, and supply chains are very dependent on producing the right components at the right time to the right locations. And if there is going to be some sort of nationalistic type of attitude towards the manufacture of chips, and the rules that get framed, which we'll see later, that is going to cause a fair amount of problems and may not be the best way forward. So this is a question. A lot of when something like this happens, when you're running short of very vital components for your devices and for technology, then the economics is one side and the other one is security, because then you become dependent on other countries who are going to be delivering those components to you. So you have to have a balance there. Um, so there's a close link between these two, between economics and security, and how to address will have to be done rather sort of intelligently. So the basic sort of thing that everybody thinks, uh, or maybe not everybody thinks, is that you need to somehow make your country first and grab whatever you can, as is happening in the case of vaccines. But that's a sort of short-term solution, and I think in the long run you lose out, because what you need is a cooperation between all sorts of component makers, and there is some sort of intelligent response. If there is a shortage, you must increase the productivity and the competitiveness. So the idea is to promote competitiveness rather than sanctions. So in order for America to become great again, it needs to become competitive in industry. It has fallen behind in the semiconductor industry, especially. And China lead is increasing as far as innovation goes. So what steps is China taking? Now, China's aspirations are these, attempting to become self-sufficient when it comes to semiconductor chips. Now, we saw in the case of Huawei, you might remember, that Huawei is not allowed to sort of sell their networking technology in the West, either in Europe or in USA. And the reason given, which was an absurd reason, is that they steal the data of all the people. But really, what the real argument is that the technology is far behind the 5G technology that Huawei has to offer. So what they did was they tried to impose, the USA especially imposed some sanctions on sale of goods, of components to China, which will promote their sort of development in technology. So that is where the trade war is happening at the moment. Now, China's aspiration has been that. Now, seeing that it has restricted sort of supply coming into its country from abroad, is starting to go for homegrown industry. Because the US sanctions not only sales to China. So they realize that in order for us, for China to really not be impacted so much by this sanctions and so on, and global hegemony, I suppose you could call it, is that you need to develop your own resources, your own sources, as it were. So it's going in a big way to try and develop its own technology on the chip side. You may remember that when I talked about the space program of China, China was excluded from the International Space Station. And the reason given was that somehow I think it's going to be strategically not in the interest of the West to include them in. So these types of measures have made China much more self-reliant, in fact, rather than pushing them back, rather than including them and being able to work together. This exclusion principle thing, the people, people in government are a bit mad at times. Their lives are short term because they don't get elected the next time and the local jobs have disappeared or something. But that's because of lack of planning and so on. So what we've seen is that the short-term measures that are taken by excluding other people is detrimental in the long run. Now, Taiwan is one of these little islands, and thus China there. Now, China has always claimed Taiwan, and Taiwan, of course, is because of Chiang Kai-shek, has got its own government now, and they consider it to be a separate country. And of course, the West supports it, and China says, no way, they're our island, and we're going to get them one day. So we'll see how that. And of course, all the chips they're buying are coming from Taiwan. So there's a double reason for China to be sort of either sort of be friendly with Taiwan, or march in and grab their sort of factories. But I don't think they're going to march in and grab. They will certainly come up with some solution to be able to have better access to Taiwan and the chips. Okay, these are the things that the US and China both want to be the tech superpowers. But big Chinese players cut off from the key American technology. So that's the restrictions that USA is placing on China. So China is starting to invest in technology for its own self-sufficiency. Now, this is a case of this Huawei. I told you they were excluded, but they're making headway in the rest of the world. The rest of the world is going in for Huawei and for the Huawei phones as well, because they cost third or even 20% of the cost of an iPhone. So, and the poorer countries are able to sort of buy them. So they're going in a pretty big way. And they're, of course, also installing the big networks in a lot of these poorer countries, because the terms that China is giving are pretty attractive. And of course, they will then be able to advance their e-commerce and so on and move ahead if they have the right type of information structure. So this is the plan that China is having in order to counteract the shortage. $1.4 trillion has been earmarked to develop the semiconductor industry by 2025. So that by the goal will be 70% of that can be acquired locally. So it's only in the next 3 or 4 years they'll become self-sufficient, nearly. So they can call it chips used in China are made in China. That's what's going to be happening. Now, what is happening is that the sanctioning by China, because of the trade war, this is happening, also places list of Chinese and Russian military for not being given the chips that are designed in USA and manufactured, even they're manufactured in Taiwan. The device are going to be restricted from availability to China and Russia. So a lot of these companies are starting to buy in advance, and that's causing a shortage again, because they're seeing that the sanctions are coming their way. They're going to sort of see the demand has increased, so they're stockpiling. So the way forward is, of course, something that has to be done on a multilateral basis, and we'll see that. And what USA is doing is good in a way. When Biden came in, they asked for a report to be produced by none other than by Schmidt. Eric Schmidt, as you know, is the head of Google. I'm not sure he's still the head, but he has led Google, for decades. And he's one of those people who is putting together that report. So it says that report, China has more money for AI and lots of very smart people, global ambitions, and an industrial policy, all of which aid its intention to the world's AI leader. So this is Eric Schmidt trying to tell the US government that China is already sort of moving very rapidly, and that US has got to do something about it. They're already ahead, of course, as we know, in 5G, and there are lots of manpower as well. So they're going ahead. So they're building its own strategy, pouring money into it in the past several years, and they're making progress. So it can be a flashpoint in terms of the trade war. Chips are now the economic and geopolitical flashpoint. It's a bit like, again, nationalism of a sort. And of course, here this time it's the scramble to try and take the lead. So, what Eric Schmidt is saying is this, that America is at great risk of falling behind China in the race to dominate this realm. The last part is according to the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. It's a blue ribbon panel of top thinkers and executives who have just sent their final report to Congress and the president. So this is what they're saying. They say, look, you need to wake up, need to do something, uh, otherwise you're going to be falling behind. That's him, Eric Schmidt there. He's the chair of the commission, former Google head of, yeah. So the key recommendations, of course, it's a bipartisan group that is part of this panel. But he says USA is not necessarily behind in everything. It is ahead in many ways on design aspects of it, but on manufacturing it is not. That's because not enough money has been spent on R&D and so on. But it's falling behind rapidly. So he says we believe that in the national emergency, you could treat it as an emergency. It's a threat to our nation unless we get our act together with respect to focusing on AI in the federal government and international security. And we have to make and we have made hundreds of recommendations for the Congress and the White House to follow. So this is what the report is saying that we have to. It says the report says that China has twice as many supercomputers as the United States. Point out that 5G program is, of course, much stronger. And Chinese have more data and have four times as many people. And it's already happening that they are moving ahead. Uh, and and so he says, look, USA are the innovators globally still, and we continue to have the strongest and the best companies. And they're almost certainly very far ahead of us, but China is very far ahead of us. So we've said that they're leading in face recognition as well as in electronic commerce and so on. So okay, I'm going to go to gallery view now so that I can see all of you, and then we can have some Q&A. Okay, that was a very fast sort of run through on what's happening on the integrated circuits. It's a very big sort of issue. It's a question of seeing whether the West will still lead in terms of innovation, or China is going to be catching up. And the recommendation by Eric Schmidt is that China has got a type of system which enables them to take a decision and implement it. Whereas in the USA, it says you don't have the mechanism to be able to uh, bring about a change very quickly because there are so many hurdles in the democratic system. And we've seen that the democratic system, for all its good things on some counts, it is very, very slow in having to bring about changes. I remember when I was in India and there was talk about India and China being at the same point in their development. This was in the 50s, 60s. And the thinking was a lot of Western commentators were saying, of course, India is going to pull ahead a lot more quickly than China. And as we have seen, China is way ahead now, 3 times more sort of bigger than India in terms of the economy. Therefore, we have a type of model of system of democracy in the West, which doesn't enable you to take big decisions very quickly and implement them. And that's where the disadvantage lies. And that's what Eric Schmidt is saying to the government in USA. You better sort of do something, start investing more in R&D, start bringing in more competent people into decision making and into sort of doing the work that needs to be done. So we'll see how far this is going to be working for for the USA. Okay, we'll go for. I think. I think I'll have to unmute you. Okay, you have to unmute yourself, I think. Okay, anybody?
Can I ask a question?
Okay, sorry, Pam. Yeah.
Yeah, I missed the first little bit, but can the chips be recycled and reused?
Well, the amount of material in it is so little and the amount of elements that go into making it needs to be 100% pure, like silicon and germanium or the stuff that they use. So the actual recycling of it may not necessarily be a big burden on resources of the world. It certainly takes a lot of resources in brain power and manpower and cash. But in terms of actual resources, very little, because they're so small. Yeah, Ruth, sorry, go ahead.
Two things. One is where the raw materials. Is Taiwan the only place in the world where the raw materials can be found? I mean.
Oh, no. Taiwan. You see, the main reason. You see, the stuff that goes into the ICs or the chips are elements, things like germanium and silicon and so on, which are plentiful. They just need to be refined, 100% well, which means there's a lot of processing involved. But the reason why Taiwan has gone ahead is the amount of investment that China has received from USA as well, from companies, which it found that they can produce it a lot more cheaper in Taiwan. And because Taiwan is a friendly power to USA, the investment came in and big companies invested, and they are then getting the results of that investment. And of course, Taiwan has a lot of very highly smart, population, and they are contributing to the making of these chips quite a lot.
So Taiwan is supplying the US and China?
Sorry?
Taiwan is supplying the US and China?
Yes. Yeah. They supply over 50% of the world's companies with their chips.
But Shafiq, if there's going to be a great shortage of these chips, why don't we focus on manufacturing more and put a focus on it? If we can manage to get a vaccine for this horrible disease, this COVID, in 9 months, we not only got one vaccine, how many? We got a whole lot of them. If we put a focus on it, then I don't see why we in the West or why we in the UK can't manufacture more. Why?
Well, in addition to having to have lots of investment, because we saw on that graph that just a factory alone costs $5 billion to set up a little chip factory. It's not like the fish and chip factory. So it's going to require $5 billion at least to set up. And in addition to that, you need to have smart, the educated, lot experienced people manning it as well. So it's a process that can't be done very, very quickly. It has to be developed. It has to sort of have a lot of R&D as well that needs to go with it. So it's not an easy thing to ramp up production very quickly. And that's what everybody's looking at right now.
Can you remind me what R&D stands for?
Research and development.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just to say.
Yeah, Malila.
Yeah. It's true. The fact is, we have preferred to send manufacturing out where work is cheaper. That's what it boils down to. So long term, that's what we've done. All manufacturing is transferred out because it's cheaper. We don't like paying people. We don't like to pay a living wage to people here.
See, that brings up into question the market model. If the market, see, basically going back again to World War II and the New World Order that was set up after the war, setting up these big institutions. That was based on the fact that there will be a free market, consumer society to take the
Mm,
world forward.
yeah.
So the model is basically that you need to have a type of business that will give profits to the shareholders. And if they find that the profits can be maximized by going to small, cheaper countries for labor, or going for automation, then they go for that. So you see, the model is fundamentally flawed in that regard, unless you have a lot of controls over making sure that the people do have a livelihood, and not working just in the interest of shareholders. That the consumer is also a stakeholder in the businesses. I think that's why the model has got to be looked at. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you when you said that sanctions don't work in the long term. It changes eventually the country will change, as China has done, and which actually Iran might well do. But you had something come up, which you said promote competitiveness versus sanctions. I couldn't understand that.
Yeah, because you see,
Doesn't
Trump's,
doesn't work either.
yeah, see,
What did
when
he mean
Trump
by that?
started the trade war with China,
Yeah.
that was a trade war with tariffs and so on, and also
Mm,
sanctioning companies so that they don't get the components like Huawei and people like those companies.
yeah.
So
Mm,
that's a war-like thing there. But
mm.
what Eric Schmidt is saying, he says, no, that's not the way that we need to do. What we need to do is to make USA more competitive in itself so that they can
Oh, yeah.
produce
Right. Yeah.
the
Understand.
goods, that need to be
Yes.
produced, because you have
Yeah.
the innovation capacity. You just need to bring in the right type of policies that government
All
can
right. Yeah.
encourage. That will be the way forward.
By
Right. I
doing
understand.
sanction, of course, America lose out because by imposing sanction, China retaliate. So they would not import the sort of thing that they would otherwise have imported. So a lot of sanction that's been imposed in China has been pulled back. I mean, it's a romantic thing to think you put a sanction, everything will be solved out. But it does not work like that because America also sell a lot of things to China. And many things America does not need and wants China to take it. So trade war does not benefit anybody.
Yeah, see, with the trade war also, it's the people who lose out, because when you put the tariffs, of goods coming into, let's say, USA, then the cost of the goods go up, which means the public gets affected. So it's not really a good sort of, if you like, policy to impose tariffs just willy-nilly like that in order to protect your own market.
Can you explain what a bulb was and how it became a transistor and how it's now a semiconductor? I mean, what the changes are.
Yeah, well, these are different names that are being used. The early name was transistor, which is really a semiconductor. When I showed you circuit, that little three-terminal circuit, the collector, emitter, and a base, that is based on a semiconductor principle, which means that it conducts electricity through these two types of elements called germanium and silicon. Now, as they started to miniaturize these transistors, they put them into chips, so as to make them smaller and smaller, until what we have today is, using this Moore's law, if you go by, it's doubling in sort of power, and in doubling in power of how many calculations it can do, or how many you can pack into a small space,
And how was the valve different? How was the valve different?
The valve has got the same principle, except that's a bit bulky. It's like a bulb, and you've got these wires that are controlling the bulb in order for the current to flow or not flow. It's the same principle that gets done in a very miniaturized way using solid state type of circuitry.
Thank you.
Right. So you're all happy with the state of the world now, are we?
Well, what do you think will happen now with the shortage? What do you think will happen?
Well, you see, when the big sort of issue is China. Now, unless we start thinking about China in a sane way and not sort of have this negative stereotypes being created for whatever reason, it means that you're not going to be moving forward in a manner which I think would benefit the whole world. China is structured in such a way that it can go very fast in the decision making it makes and the progress it makes. And the West is going to lag behind despite its vast sort of potential to try and innovate and to be able to have the market forces working away. Yet they are going to be not as powerful, in my view, as a state which decides and say, we are going to spend so much money supporting X, Y, and Z, and here are the people that we are going to train for that. And then, of course, give the recipe for what needs to be done. Whereas if you leave it to market forces, one is going to look around and say, where am I going to make the big bucks first? And then find a sort of niche somewhere and start a little startup. So that sort of idea, I think, is quaint and good, but I think it's not going to be able to compete with the type of things that China is using to surge ahead. Yeah, Susanna, you've got a virtual background, I see. Very good. I think I'm going to have one. Yeah.
I just want to remind people, we all think that COVID vaccine was developed in 8 months or 10 months. In fact, the research has been going for a long time, from SARS and other things. It's just been treated. I mean, it is absolutely a miracle that we came out, vaccine, but it's not from the scratch in the way that we all think. The vaccine has been in research for the last 20 years. So you cannot really compare production of vaccine to develop something like, computer chips that cost huge amount of money to build a factory, like you just said. Yeah,
you see, with the chips, the technology is there. So what you need to do is to make investment and bring the right training sort of people to start using it. And be able to have the costs in such a way that they are economic or feasible. So in other words, create a parallel Taiwan in USA, which is not going to be easy.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree about the vaccine.
Yeah.
No, I agree with Mei-Ling about the vaccine having, everything was there, but it's just you needed people to throw money at it, and you also needed to be sure that you had a market. Whereas with SARS, you may not have had a market because it was very self-contained, and the market wasn't there. But with COVID, there is a market, so everyone was there with their money.
Right. I just remember when.
So that's the point.
When Trump tried to punish a company that open factory or have factory in China, and Ford simply say, e.g. say, we cannot continue to produce that nobody wants to buy, or far more expensive than what we are getting at the moment. So like you say, you've got to have a demand for that articles.
Yeah.
And they pull back. And look, Trump talks big, as you know, but lots of sort of things he threatened to put the restriction or import duty or whatever, he has dismantled them because he found out it's impractical. Because, as I say, nobody wants to buy, or is China retaliate, And so these are all empty threats.
You see, there is a very fundamental thing that one needs to rethink about. Again, going back to World War II and the free market and all the institutions that have been set up, they are much more based on the fact that market forces and the greed element and demand element are going to be the way forward. It seems to me when we had this pandemic here, that brought it out very clearly that you need to have a social conscience and social action that needs to take things forward, not just individual greed. So our fundamental things need to be sort of looked at, and some uh, amendments have got to be brought in that will give the public a stake in the free market, except just being a demand and a consumer or a you need to be able to benefit as well. Okay, indirectly the taxes are there and all that, you benefit and so on that way. But I think there has got to be a social conscience with the big companies. The big companies like oil companies that have been polluting the world for such a long time, they are not going to clean up. And who are going to be paying for it? We, public, are going to be paying for that, for all the climate sort of disasters that have taken place. And apart from polluting various places, like if you take the case of Nigeria, the whole of that delta has been polluted by Shell, I think, and they paid off a little bit of money to the government and say, you better clean it up. And of course, that government pocketed the money, and that pollution is left there. So the oil companies who are the pollutant, or for that matter, the countries that are the pollutant, needs to be held accountable and help those countries which are less in a position to bring about a change. So this hopefully climate thing in next year in Glasgow is going to, as Mark Carney says, make the companies responsible for bringing about a change, and that they can become responsible by looking at what sort of risk they're going to be facing in the future. So if that notion gets into the companies' heads, then I think they will be making a change. And I think we need to bring in the whole world to bring about more inclusive type of decision making than go it alone, which Trump has espoused. America first, me first, transactions first. That sort of Neanderthal thinking, I think, is not in our interest. Yes, Jim. Your audio is off.
I haven't got,
Oh,
I can't talk at the moment. I've got a repairman here. And that's what I'm saying. So I'm not going to answer my question, might get interrupted. But I'll talk next time. Sorry.
Okay, fine, no problem.
Because it's not fair to everybody else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering,
Yeah, Giselle.
sort of, adding Mei Ling from what you were saying, I just think it seems to me that there is a growing demand now for these chips, and it's growing all the time because of our heavier and heavier reliance on tech things. We're using it more and more. The older generation who are not using it, and now more and more people are using it. This is going to grow also with more AI being used all the time. And I think that the demand will be growing enormously. From what you're saying, there's a shortage already, and the demand is growing, and we can't supply the demand. It would seem to me that it would be worth going into. I don't know why they're not looking at manufacturing it.
I think this has the pandemic has accelerated the demand, and that's why it's been highlighted so sort of starkly. Because quite often what these companies do is they take orders in advance and they see what the forecasts are and so on, and they produce as much. And also the old supply chains, you see, they depended on what they called just in time, JIT, which means that they don't hold inventory, by in big sort of amounts locally. They just order, say, supposing you wanted something for tomorrow, they might pick up something and order it. If it's locally, they get it. But if it's far away, they might give 2 or 3 days notice and you get it. So what it means to the companies is that they, by not holding the inventory, they reduce their costs. And therefore they can give a better service at a cheaper sort of, keep the expenses down. But now with this just-in-time type of inventory philosophy has caused this. The pandemic has caused slowing down on so many fronts. That has been sort of shaken about a bit, and you can't forecast too easily. Because all of a sudden this pent-up demand is going to be showing up and you can't fulfill that demand. That's how things are at the moment.
Yeah, the demand for what's happened during the pandemic is not going to suddenly stop, because I think that people have had a taste of what it can do. And I think that people are not going to be racing around the world in the way that they did. People have seen what it can be, Zooming on the other side of the world, seeing their family and people. I think people zooming off around the world for conferences is not going to be as great. And I think that we're still going to be continuing to Zoom and that sort of thing a lot more than we ever did before the pandemic.
Yes, you're right, because it's not only the integrated circuits or the chips and the devices that we use that is going to be on the increase, but technology is also trying to diminish the cost element to a in a large way to the environment. That's why electric cars are so important, and they use this integrated circuits quite a bit rather than the fuel car, the fossil fuel cars, although they do also use integrated chips as well, but not as in abundance as the other one. So there are those areas that need to be looked at afresh and seeing, okay, now that a big change has come about because of the pandemic in ways that people probably didn't anticipate, I think businesses have got to rechart their forecasts and their pathways. And this is a good opportunity for government to try and encourage them to go towards green policies more, because in history we don't get points like this where a sudden change has brought about people to reevaluate their lifestyles in a way. Therefore, they can frame policies. The governments can frame policies that will nudge the big companies towards green policies. And I think this is a good opportunity. If they pick up the challenge, things could look brighter in the future. Yeah, Laura, we haven't seen you there before.
Do you know something, Shafiq?
Yeah.
I was so interested in what you were saying, but then I kept on being messaged and taken away, so I kept on forgetting to come back, and not to come back, but I wanted to ask you questions, and now they've gone out my head.
Yeah, okay. Well, not to worry.
I'm so sorry. It's like I get very distracted, and I really was interested in what you were saying. Honestly, I was. But then the phone went and something else, and I wanted to ask you, and it's gone. Do you know, I think I'm going senile.
I think we're all getting there, but don't worry about it.
I'm extremely worried. You know, I had lunch. And then I looked around and I thought, the dishes have all been washed. You know, I stood there thinking, I don't remember washing the dishes. And that worried me. And then I had to think back and I thought, oh yeah, I got so distracted doing other things that I washed the dishes while I was thinking about something else. And it didn't make me live in the present.
Yeah. You know, there was a very good program this morning on start of the week on Radio 4, and it talked about melancholy. And people have written something about it. And one thing that I picked up from that was very, very interesting. I knew it, but it wasn't put so starkly to me before. And that was the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. Because, you know, we've got so many health issues, mental issues of one sort or another, you know, coming to the fore. He says a psychiatrist is one who sort of prescribes pills,
Yeah.
and the psychologist is one who treats you. It's therapy.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fantastic. I'd go to any day to a psychologist rather than to a psychiatrist, I think.
A psychiatrist
right.
has a medical degree and he deals with illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar, psychotic illnesses. The psychologist does not have a medical degree. The psychologist has degrees in psychology and maybe masters and other things, but doesn't have a medical degree. The psychiatrist can prescribe medication for schizophrenia and bipolar. A psychologist can't do that.
Yeah. But it's,
Yeah, I worked for
I
both.
think that's how our problem will go away when it's all uplifted. I think we
Yeah.
all suffering from being locked into that.
That's exactly right, Mei-Ling. I think that's why I'm a bit absolutely
You'll be all
disgusted.
right. Once the summer comes, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. You'll be back to
Please,
your
God.
The sun's shining today, so it's all uphill from now on.
Laura,
Downhill.
one thing I say always to my friends as well, you must do a JW test every day, in the morning
Oh yes.
and in the evening. And you know
What's
what?
a JW test?
Yeah, Johnny Walker test. You pour a you pour a peg of whiskey on a glass, and if you can smell it, then you don't have COVID. And in the evening, another peg, and you can taste it, then you don't have COVID.
You can do it with red wine as well.
Hallelujah. This is a
Smell
good
it?
thing. I'm going to do it tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure, have another one just to make sure.
I can't tell the difference between wine and Johnny Walker. I'll just do both, you know.
Well, maybe you haven't tested enough. If you carry on, you'll be able to tell the difference.
Yeah. Then I will be forgetful. Then I really will have some kind of memory loss.
But you won't care.
Then I won't care. Can I ask, how is everybody coping with this lockdown? Are you all busy?
Very.
Yes. Doing something or the other.
Yeah.
You can always go for a walk outside with one person or even by yourself. There's wonderful places to go walking where there aren't people.
I know, Giselle, I'm doing it every day. I'm doing it every single day, almost. Except this weekend I got ill, so I couldn't go. But normally I go by the river.
Somebody told me that you must ring up a friend a day whom you haven't spoken for years.
Good idea.
Yeah,
If
I
you
think
still
that's
have the
right.
number, you can give them a call and say,
Yeah.
are you still around?
You know, I was talking to KPMG. There was a conference about lockdown, and they were saying that these Zoom meetings have allowed introverts to rise to the occasion. And they're
Really?
getting ideas from a whole load of introverts in KPMG who never said anything, because everybody's equal. Normally it's the very powerful person, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
who's very confident.
Mm.
And they're going to use this to try and get ideas because of things like AI, of what we're talking about today. They need ideas of how companies are going to cope with this rapid change. It's really, so lockdown, they're saying, has had a positive benefit in some respects as well as negative. It's quite interesting.
Is the introvert better sort of position to express himself just looking at pictures on a screen rather than having a real person in front?
Yeah, they are, because they're equal. You
Yeah.
don't have to face an audience. A lot of people, you know, everybody can put their idea, whereas when they're in a big crowd of people, You really have to be strong to put your point of view across. But the whole conference was about what we're talking about. What's the impact going to be on businesses and non-profits of exactly what you're saying? And the KPMG was saying you need a lot of ideas to cope with all this. And it could be the outlier. Like it doesn't have to be the expert. It could just be somebody who's heard something. And so it was just an interesting conference. It really was.
What conference was that?
It was a KPMG digital conference. You can go in. They have KPMG Insights. You can click on it, and it's free.
They're management consultants.
Yeah, the management consultants, KPMG and accountants. And what they're worried about is they're actually accountants. You know, they have to sign off the accounts that a business is a going concern. It's going to go on forever. And what they're saying with digital coming along, if the companies don't adjust quickly and properly, they can't sign off the accounts because they can be taken out, like the retailers, the big retailers, or Blockbuster, for instance, you know, who've been taken out by Netflix. There used to be 9,000 Blockbuster stores. Now there's only one.
No kidding.
Yeah. So that they've got to think ahead, and that's why they're giving all their clients a kick up the arse. They're saying about exactly what we're talking here today. They say if you don't adjust, you're finished. It's really interesting.
That's what Matt Carney was saying as the Bank of Governor when he retired.
Yeah.
He said that every business has to do a risk assessment regarding climate as to whether they will exist, you know, in the years ahead.
Yeah.
And if they find that they're not, they're going to have to make the changes right now.
That's exactly what they're saying. They've got to start now. I'm going to have to go now but lovely
Okay, so
meeting
we'll call
everybody.
it a day. Oh, by the way, just
Thank
a part thing that Laura,
Yeah.
you can go to YouTube and ask any question, and somebody will be there to tell you how to do it.
You're right.
Yeah, go to YouTube and put the question. All right.
I may do that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just
Bye,
lazy.
everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.